Hey, what's up, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. Today, I am so excited for this episode because we have on the one and only Marianne Williamson again today. So I went out to Washington, D.C. just a few weeks ago, and we launched that episode 2 weeks ago, which is part one to this series with her. And so today we are uploading part two, where I had the chance to interview her again on an Instagram live. And I got to ask her even more questions about forgiveness, returning to love, about her journey in the presidential candidacy, and all the things that I didn't get the chance to ask her on our first episode. So this is going to be a follow-up to that. Now, I did want to presence for you. This episode is going to have a little bit of a different audio and video quality, so not up to our usual standard because, of course, it's an Instagram live. So please bear with me with that. But I know that this episode is going to give you so many nuggets of wisdom and even more integration from what we learned from her in the first episode. And I'm really excited for you to hear it. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
We've become so disconnected from relationship, whether it's to the divine, to each other, to the planet, to animals. And that's what I think is happening now. People are looking for a way to regenerate, repair, restore.
Yeah.
We need a season of repair. And that's what religion and spirituality should be.
We're back, baby, with a brand new season of the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. Join us each week as we have unfiltered conversations about how to transform your life. Our mission is to usher in a new era of spirituality where you don't have to be all love and light to live a life of alignment. Here, we honor all of it, the profound and the profane, the magic and the messy, and all things that make you human. So let's discuss the truth behind transformation and be unapologetic in our evolution. From manifestation to money, embodiment to energy, and all taboo topics, nothing is going to be off limits. Are you ready to live a life that feels just as good as it looks? Let's get fucking spiritual. I am so excited for this live today because I have the privilege of interviewing someone for the second time who has deeply impacted my life and the lives of millions of people. So many of you definitely know her, Marianne Williamson. If you have not yet checked out the podcast that we did on It's Fucking Spiritual, we got the chance to meet in person in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, and that went live last Wednesday. So this conversation is going to be a continuation of that interview and of her book, The Mystic Jesus, which, if you have not gotten this book yet, you guys definitely go get it anywhere books are sold. It is amazing, regardless of your relationship with Jesus and the church and all of that. This is an incredible book that I could not recommend enough to literally everyone, and we're going to be talking about it today. So we're going to give Marianne a couple of minutes.
Hey there.
Marianne, hi.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, I'm so excited to continue our conversation. I was just saying on the live before you hopped on that we had an amazing conversation a couple weeks ago that went live last week. And it's just really exciting to get to talk to you too again and connect with you in this way and to get to ask you the things that I didn't get to at that point. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time to sit down with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah.
You're back in Austin now?
I am back in Austin now. We've just got off of hosting a retreat. So feeling really, really good and really lit up, and just also got such an amazing feedback from the episode that we did, and people are absolutely loving it. So I'm excited for them to go get your book. And I was telling everyone before you hopped on to go get The Mystic Jesus. It is an incredible book that is just so full of so much wisdom and knowledge. And I would love for us to just hop right into it.
Anything you want to talk about, we'll dance with you, as they say.
Amazing. So I didn't actually get the chance to ask you this on the original episode, but what actually compelled you to write the book? We didn't even go into that. What was the thing that came through you? What inspired you to write something about Jesus?
You know, books like A Course in Miracles, and I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. My first book, A Return to Love, was reflections on the principles of the Course. The popularity of so many of these spiritual books that are around today is due to the fact that people want a closer relationship with some sense of higher power, God, divinity, but people have rejected a lot of the doctrine and dogma of organized religion and religious institutions, and in many cases for good reason. On the other hand, they don't want to feel that they threw away the baby with the bathwater. And that's why books like A Course in Miracles are popular, I think. And when I started reading A Course in Miracles, which is not a religion, there's no doctrine, there's no dogma, it's based on universal spiritual themes. It's really the psychology of forgiveness. It's how to release a thought system based on fear that dominates our lives, dominates the planet, to accept instead a thought system based on love. People are beginning to understand in an almost mainstream way that our thoughts create our experience, and that our experience will not ultimately change until and unless we change our thoughts. On the other hand, changing from fear, separation, attack, defensiveness, judgment, victimization, sometimes transitioning from those thought forms to love and forgiveness is a lot easier said than done. And so that's where a lot of people are now. We understand abstractly, we have to change our thoughts, we have to become more loving, we have to be, but then life comes at you. So Jesus is a similar issue in that many people say, I want to know about Jesus, but I don't want the dogma and the doctrine and the brimstone and the hellfire and, you know, what a lot of people have felt they got. Not in all cases. There are many progressive Christians, there are many more enlightened versions of the Christ-centered story. But many people have felt, based on their own upbringing or whatever, but still people have felt an interest in Jesus. And my whole career has been about looking at the universal spiritual themes. I've written about Buddha, I've written about Moses, I've written about Jesus before, in the sense that there is a psychological dynamic, a metaphysical understanding that affects us emotionally, that is very relevant to our daily lives within the truth of all these great religious and spiritual traditions. And that very much includes Jesus. So I think that this book is for people who want to know more about Jesus, who have a sense there's something there, but don't necessarily want to feel like there's a specifically Christian orientation. And the Jesus in this book is a spiritual force, a universal spiritual force that cannot be monopolized by any institution. You can't, nobody gets to monopolize the stars, the winds, the breeze. And so I was actually asked by my editor. He said, you know, a lot of people, we hear from booksellers, people want to hear more about Jesus, but they don't want to have to commit to a particular religious orientation in order to do so. So as a student of the Course in Miracles, it was like, yeah, this is the Course in Miracles, of course, is based on his guidance and his teaching.
Yeah. And I feel like your take on Jesus is going to be so much easier for people to accept and lean into, especially for anybody that has had any religious trauma or things that are really challenging for them to open to the teachings from a traditional sense in a Christianity and a religious way. So I absolutely love that. And I know that you mentioned a universal spiritual truth, and I would love to hear in your words what that truth is.
The mind of love. You know, the subtitle of the book, it's Mystical Jesus, the Mind of Love. You know, we were talking a couple of minutes ago about how mind is the level of cause, and the experience of our lives is the level of effect. But in this, we are taught mental thought forms and attitudes. We're mentally trained from a very early age to be more closed-hearted than open-hearted. to be more fearful of the world than to be loving, to judge more easily than we bless. And so, particularly today, I think this has a particular relevance to even in our country today. Things are so mean. People are so mean. People attack so casually, lie so casually. The social media is filled with lies. People have no problem repeating the lies. There's such an ethical breakdown of honor. Was that honorable to do this, to say that? We don't give people the benefit of the doubt. There's no mercy. It's like, what is happening to us? And people, then we see that mean-spiritedness of attack. We see the attacks on the earth. We see attacks on countries. We see attacks on people. What are we doing? And the thing is, everybody knows this. It's not like people don't get it, but circumstances are gnarly. Life is complicated. The truth is simple, but life is complicated.
Yeah.
And actually learning how the teachings, in this case of Jesus, but remember, the teachings of, the story in the Old Testament, the stories in Buddhist scriptures, all the great religious teachings. There's Sufism in Islam, there's the Kabbalah in Judaism, the Gnostic Christian tradition, all the great religious traditions have their mystical path. And the mystical path has to do with the fact, the idea that your relationship to God does not need to be brokered by an external institution, but rather that there is an internal guidance system.
Yeah.
And that's what in A Course in Miracles, Jesus is seen as an internal teacher, and in fact, an evolutionary elder brother. And evolutionary elder brother in the sense that he has actualized the potential which is within all of us. So he says in A Course in Miracles that he says, I don't have anything you don't have. The difference between us is I don't have anything else. That every perception has been purified of lovelessness, and all that exists is love. So he has the capacity to look beyond the level of perception. Yes, somebody was mean. Yes, somebody gave you a dirty look. Yes, somebody did whatever. But that we can train our mental musculature, just like you train the muscles of your body. You can train your attitudinal muscles, your psychological and emotional strengths that can be developed so that we see through this physical evidence of all the stuff that's happening to a deeper truth that we know to be true in our hearts. And that's it. Everybody just wants to love and be loved.
Yeah.
But we have gotten so confused on this planet. So enlightenment is an unlearning, not a learning. And Jesus and the Course in Miracles does not claim a monopoly on truth. And it does not present the idea of a Jesus who is the only way. There is only one way to God. Jesus is one name on that only way. The only way is through unconditional love.
Yeah.
And that's whether it's in Judaism, to love mercy, to do justice, to walk humbly with our God, infinite compassion in Buddhism, these universal spiritual themes. And then whether it's Jesus or any other actual, I think of them as I think of them as a rope, we're down at the bottom of a well. And when we were kids, we were taught about evolution. And we were taught that if a species is acting in a way that is maladaptive for its survival, that one of two things is going to happen. It's going to either evolve into another direction, or it's going to go extinct. I was just this morning looking at a video from the Secretary General of the United Nations saying the situation on the planet is unsustainable.
Yeah.
And unsustainable means unsurvivable. It's not to us, then to our children or our children's children or their children. So what happens in evolution is that a mutation occurs. A member of the species who is behaving in a way that moves in another direction. And to me, that's what all the great spiritual masters are. And that's what Jesus is. And with that new possibility that is opened up, the species, in this case, the human species, has an opportunity to move in a sustainable and survivable direction. And to me, that's what's happening on the planet right now.
So I love this entire conversation, and I'm curious your thoughts of like, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where we are in this space where it's really a dire, I mean, you even mentioned it on the podcast. For anybody listening to this, if you haven't listened to part one with the podcast on It's Fucking Spiritual, go listen. You mentioned like there are dark forces on the planet, and it really hit me. I got full chills when you said this. Like, we need to be waking up and taking full responsibility and ownership for what it is that we're doing and creating. How did we get here in the first place, and how do we begin to shift this?
Well, there are answers to that on both the external and the internal levels. How do we get here externally? Running for president for a year and a half, I had a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
But how we got here internally began, the Course in Miracles would say, millions of years ago in time as we know it. When humanity first began to think with lovelessly. And the issue here is that the mind is so powerful. Free will means we can do whatever we want with our mind, but what we cannot determine is the power of our mind. So whatever way we use thinking, it will move us in one direction or the other. So if I choose a loving thought, the law of cause and effect means that loving results will follow. But if I use my mind in a non-loving way, then that means that unloving results will follow. And that's the only problem on the planet. Gandhi said that the problem with the world is that humanity is not in its right mind. If you really stand back and you look at the way we treat each other, we have 12,000 children on this planet starve every day, and there's no dearth of food. We spend trillions of dollars on nuclear bombs when a few of them would do the trick. We are violent towards the earth, we're violent towards each other, and we're violent towards ourselves. So if we talk about it in metaphysical and spiritual terms, it began a long, long, long time ago. But in metaphysical terms, if you talk physics, time itself, if you think about it, is an illusion of consciousness, as Einstein said. The past is only in your mind. The future is only in your mind. The problem is not what happened in the past. The problem is that we continue to reiterate the problem every moment we close our hearts.
Yeah.
But as I said before, the world is painful. We go through things. People aren't always nice. And that's why books like this, teachings like this, and remember, it's been called by many a self-study program, a spiritual psychotherapy. The Course in Miracles says that religion and psychotherapy are at their peak the same thing. It's all about a healing of the mind. And so what's happening on the planet now is we are rethinking everything. One world falling apart, another world struggling to be born. We are rethinking everything. We're rethinking religion, we're rethinking politics, we're rethinking education, we're rethinking economics, we're rethinking agriculture, we're rethinking medicine. And that's a good thing. And we won't get out, the species will not get out of here alive until we do begin to rethink everything, to rethink the purpose of our lives. Your entire life changes if you accept and embrace and try to claim on a daily basis the fact that we're here to be instruments of love. We're here to be instruments of peace. And what does that mean? So the ego mind would say that means you'll be a loser. That means you'll never win. That means people will take advantage of you. It means you'll never make any money. You'll never have any success. And this book, and then, any material like this, is one pointing out that actually it's the way to success, it's the way to abundance, it's the way to peace, it's the way to harmony. We won't have outer peace in the world until we have inner peace in our hearts. So the outer, for me, professionally as well as personally, I'm interested in both the level of external change and internal change. Martin Luther King said in order to establish the beloved community, we need external changes in our circumstances and internal shifts, qualitative shifts in our souls.
So good. So good. And I was curious as I was feeling into what I wanted to ask you as well. And this is kind of a big question too, but obviously not just how we got here, which I know you answered. And I know it's about like returning to love in our hearts. And I so agree on the internal and the external. And the internal will shift the external. But I'd be curious to hear, I always find it's great to have a vision or a roadmap. Like what in your view, what would the world look like if we returned to love in our hearts?
It's really interesting that you say that because when it comes to our personal lives, people tell us all the time, visualize what you want.
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting us to visualize the world that we want. First of all, let's visualize a planet in which war is merely a memory. Just like there's no one alive on the planet in the United States anyway. Unfortunately, slavery still exists on the planet. But in the United States, there are no longer any surviving enslaved people from slavery in the American South before the Civil War. Within a few years, there will no longer be any survivors of the Holocaust still left on the planet. Imagine a planet in which there is no longer anyone alive who has the memory of having been involved in a war. Right?
Yeah.
So John F. Kennedy said, we will get rid of war, or war will get rid of us. Somebody's saying that's not true. I don't know what they're saying is not true. I'd like to know, but whatever, you can write it in if you like. So that's the first thing. What would the world be? So what we need to do is imagine the world that we want and then reverse engineer from there. For instance, we play war games. We should also play peace games. You know what it's like? It's like with the shift into integrative medicine. It's not enough. We get that. Mainstream understanding, we get that. That it's not enough to just treat the symptoms of sickness. You have to proactively create health. Because if you just, the allopathic model, which is a very obsolete model, you don't take care of your lifestyle, you don't take care of your nutrition, you don't take care of exercise, you don't do anything to proactively create health. And then if you get sick, you just try to suppress or eradicate the symptoms. Well, with the world, it can be the same. You can't not take care of people. You can't not take care of the environment. You can't not take care of the planet. You can't not take care of children and then not expect some terrible things to follow. And then think, well, okay, we can put enough people in prison or we can drop enough bombs. We can suppress the symptoms enough. And we're living at a time where, no, you're going to have to live differently on the planet in order to proactively create the world you want. And that's why everybody's talking about organic, regenerative farming, talking about new modalities in health, talking about new modalities in economics and business and how economies should be run. What our modern world has done is it has disconnected us from the truth of who we are. It has disconnected us from the love and the relational core of being alive, that we are in relationship with each other. When our ancestors were in relationship with nature, and we've become so disconnected from relationship, whether it's to the divine, to each other, to the planet, to animals. And that's what I think is happening now. People want to repair. People are looking for a way to regenerate, repair, restore. We need a season of repair. And that's what religion and spirituality should be. The word religio in Latin means to bind back. So, A Course in Miracles and my book, Mystic Jesus, etc., is about the internal work, not external dogma, external doctrine, but about the internal work of becoming more forgiving of yourself as well as of others, taking responsibility for what has happened, and trying to be the people that we know in our hearts we were born to be.
Yeah. Oh, so good. And I couldn't agree more. And just Yeah, even what I heard from everything that you just said, it's like switching from defense to offense, switching from reaction to creation, right? And instead of like
Creation.
yeah,
To proactively create a better life. We are so focused on what's wrong, and this from a metaphysical, what my book does. I saw somebody said, read it. You were holding it up before.
yes. Everyone listening, if you're
You know.
just joining, we're talking about Marianne's book, The Mystic Jesus. Go listen to this and the podcast that we did that came out last week on It's Fucking Spiritual for part 1 of this conversation. Yeah.
So what I do in the book is I take some of the main principles of the life of Jesus. I mean, we know that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. That's the historical Jesus. But there's also the ahistorical Jesus, which is, as I said, a force of consciousness as alive today inside us as the man was 2,000 years ago. And so the archetypal psychological significance of the story, for instance, the birth of Jesus, Mary's pregnancy, Mary representing the divine feminine, the human heart inside all of us. She's awakened in the middle of the night, the idea that humanity is in a state of slumber. She's told to go up to the roofs, the higher mind. There she's met by the angel Gabriel, angels of the thoughts of God. And she is told, you're going to give birth to the Son of God. All of us are being told the same thing right now. You are pregnant with a new possibility of yourself. Because until we're pregnant and giving birth to that new possibility of who we are, we will not be able to give birth to a better world. Because the world is just a reflection of our own state of consciousness and thought. So the idea of the that we are all, we're giving birth to some better version of ourselves, mothered by our humanity and fathered by God.
Mm.
And it's a difficult pregnancy.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult birth. But this being that will emerge and that is trying to emerge has so much more power. Love restores reason and not the other way around. It's the power to repair this world. And then what I do within the book is, what is crucifixion? Crucifixion is what the loveless ego mind would do to you. It makes you self-sabotage and undermine and attack people and ruin relationships and unnecessary wars. And like, what are we doing? But that's the power of that crucifixion. The Course in Miracles says, look at it, but do not dwell on it.
Yeah.
Go directly to the resurrection. The resurrection is the restoration of our right mind, where we love one another. Once again, simple, but a lot easier said than done.
Easier said than done. 100%.
Simple
Yeah.
to talk about, but very complicated to live. And I hope that in reading the book, people will feel some experience the kinds of insights that are those aha moments.
Yeah.
That make it easier to make these things practical, because that's really what they're meant to be. Not just abstract theological concepts, but actual lessons, practical lessons in living our lives in a more beautiful way.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing it up too about the practicality of the application of this work, because that's obviously when we really see the shifts in our lives, is not just reading the books and not just like talking about, okay, we need to create a better world, but really how do we put this into practice? And I'm glad that we're shifting here too, because I wanted to bring up some more practical steps and tips for people that might be in their own crucifixion in their life. And Marianne, I know when we met, we didn't talk too much about my story or how I got into this, but I know that I mentioned that I was atheist growing up and didn't have that belief outside of myself. And it was my own moment of being brought to my knees in my own crucifixion. When I was 16 years old, my father was killed in a freak accident. And that is what ended up getting me on this path. And you mentioned in the book, the only thing to be saved from is our own misguided belief that we are separate and alone in a random and meaningless universe, for that is the source of all fear. And in that quote, I really felt my younger self, because the level of suffering that I went through in my late teens and early 20s was when my father died. Being atheist, or that's what I would have identified with at the time, just because I didn't have a frame, it caused me such great despair, because it was like, well, nothing matters and he's gone and clearly there's no God. I mean, I was in this, and it led to drug and alcohol abuse, and it led to poor relationships. And it wasn't until I was 23 when I was really brought to my knees after an 8-year spiral from grief and loss, that I feel that I walked my own path of eventually, coming through that, the willingness, the forgiveness, the giving it over to a power greater than me. And that was kind of my first spiritual awakening. But what I want to bring, the reason I bring that up is because I know people that are going through deep suffering, deep grief. It's like, okay, that's great to, have your own resurrection and come back into love. But had you told me that at that time, before I had the frame of walking the path that I do, I think it's still challenging, but it's easier over time as I've kind of flexed the muscle of surrendering and opening to a greater power. What would you say to somebody that's going through deep grief, deep loss, that's like, how am I even supposed to get there? I'm so angry at the world or at God, or I don't even believe in this. But what would you say to them?
First of all, I just want to tell you how sorry I am. As far as people going through something, everybody is right now.
Yeah.
These are very turbulent times. And the country is going through a crucifixion. Our democracy is going through a crucifixion. The world is going through a crucifixion. The environment, what's happening with the climate is a crucifixion, where the way things have unfolded versus the truth of love in our hearts, it seems so disconnected. And for you, when your father died, if you had no sense that death is not ultimately real, that the spirit lives on, it wasn't just grief, it was the tortuous grief of having no context for any kind of faith that he was still there, that, as the Course in Miracles says, physical birth is not a beginning but a continuation, physical death is not an end but a continuation. So, first of all, whoever is going through whatever they're going through, please know you're not alone. This is a difficult time on the planet. This is a difficult time on the planet. People are going through some very difficult things. And, I used to say, Rachel, in my talks to audiences, I'd say, imagine the most difficult moment you've ever been through. And these people would, theoretically remember back to their greatest moment of suffering. And then I would say, it is statistically reasonable to assume that the person to your right has suffered that much as well. And it is statistically reasonable to assume that the person to your left has suffered that much as well. It is statistically reasonable to assume that the same is true about the people in front of you and the people behind you. That changes everything right there. To know, this is, as Victor Hugo said, every time you meet anyone, know that you are in the presence of a great war.
Whew, wow.
And suffering gives us X-ray vision into the suffering of others. And that's why, Rachel, you can say that actually began your path. In the story of Jesus, when the women came to retrieve the body of Christ 3 days later, they were told he's not here, he has risen. What happens as we go through these crucifixions is that if we work at it, we become better people. That, Khalil Gibran has that marvelous line about how the most massive characters are seared by scars. That it's often the suffering we went through and the wisdom that we gained because of it. What we learned about ourselves, what we learned about how the world works, what we learned about other people. It's a cliche to say it, but you can get bitter or you can get better. I see that in my own life. It's not just what happens, it's what are you going to do with what happens? Because if you want to constrict your heart, grow bitter, angry, pathetic, you can do that. If you do, you will have one life. But if you say, no, I'm actually going to let this make me more of a person, learn more, better person, more loving, then you'll have another life. And so I think that we, number one, have to remember that you're not the only one who's suffering right now. Number two, there are seasons of pain. There are seasons of pain. You have to go through grief. You have to go through the human experience. On the other hand, there's a place where processing our pain, if we're not careful, becomes indulging our pain.
Yeah.
Where feeling our feelings, if we're not careful, we start spewing them. And so we're all learning, it's part of the art of life I have to go through this. There's something, what is this crucifixion teaching me? Whether it was a cancer diagnosis, a divorce, the death of a loved one, getting sober. There are so many things that people are going through right now. Well, look at what our country is going through right now. This is so difficult, what we're all going through with this presidential campaign. We're all in this conundrum and temptation to judge others who have the audacity not to agree with us, and assuming the worst about each other and canceling people. And it's just like, we must say, I wish to stand for something different. And sometimes, in this, one of my favorite books is a book called Letters to a Young Poet. And Rilke says in there, he says, sometimes when you don't have the answer to a problem, you have to live the question. And this is difficult for Americans because we like to get things done. We're good with a to-do list. Just tell me what I have to do to fix it. Tell me what I have to do to fix it.
Get me from A to B.
It's not like that. You have to feel that pain. You have to learn from the pain. You have to take responsibility for your part. You have to seek to forgive others for theirs. And whether it's Jesus or any other metaphysical, spiritual, or religious path, it's a journey to depending on the mind of love to liberate you and save you from the hell of your despair. Because anger won't do it, victimization won't do it, bitterness won't do it, cynicism won't do it. That is the meaning of the pit of hell.
Yeah.
And God is not that which sent you to hell. God is that which delivers you from hell. And that's, even a phrase like salvation. Well, the only thing, it's a psychological term. The only thing to be saved from is your own thinking that we're all just inundated by, and particularly today, I think, assaulted by.
Yeah.
We have a great ethical breakdown in our society today, and we must be very disciplined in our refusal to participate.
Yeah. And I know we spoke about that last time on the podcast. For those of you joining, this is our follow-up conversation on the podcast we did last week on It's Fucking Spiritual, discussing Marianne's book, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. So definitely go get that. And I love that you speak on this in the book, Marianne, about this being a discipline. And I know we talked about it on the podcast. And to your point of like, hell can be here now or heaven can be here now based on the thoughts that we're attuning to. And certainly in the 8 years that I spent in deep, deep, deep suffering before I had any frame or belief outside of myself was certainly my personal hell. And it led to a lot of external hell in choices that I made because of the suffering that I was enduring at that time. And yeah, I just love that you bring that up of we can feel our feelings, but then we get to hand it over and have a shift in perception, which I know, of course, in Miracles defines as a miracle, is the shift in perception from fear to love. And if anybody is, suffering right now, and I know you talk about like handing it over to God and the willingness to hand it over, but like, what does that look like for someone practically? That sounds really great, but when we hand it over to God, how do we do that?
Well, sometimes it means crying. The time to be heartbroken is when your heart is breaking. But it's not just raging at the universe. That's what you had to do when you had no construct for what had happened beyond the meaningless and the random. When we have a holy context, a sacred grail for our suffering, then it means several things. First of all, it's the self-care that we all know. Watch what you eat, try to get exercise, and find your path, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Course in Miracles, whether it's this book, whether it's whatever your religious or spiritual path. That's number one. And practice it in the morning. If you wake up in the morning and we give yourself to the news, to Twitter, to Instagram, to TikTok, the world will just assault you with the kinds of thinking that will make it harder rather than easier. First things first in the morning, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the big book of AA, whether it's A Course in Miracles, whether it's whatever your inspirational reading, even 5 minutes in the morning. It's just like you go to the gym to train your attitudinal muscles, your physical muscles. And if you don't do that, they're headed down. The same is true with our mental muscles, our emotional muscles, our attitudinal muscles. If you don't work on keeping them up, positivity, blessing, taking responsibility, atoning for your mistakes, work, forgiving others for theirs. And that's what books like this move you through. Then what happens is your attitudinal muscles get flabby. You fall into anger, cynicism, ain't it awful? It will never be any different. They hate me, whatever. And then you look down the road and you go, if I stay here, I'm going to have a life that reflects that. And so you seek to do differently. The next thing, sacred friends. Don't share your suffering with just anybody, because not everybody's going to understand. Not everybody's going to understand. And to talk about your suffering to those who will invalidate it or express anything other than deep listening. So whether it's first a therapist, a counselor, clergy, spiritual support group, or just even one friend, two friends, three friends, to really give your suffering sacred space. And know that this is a season. This is the season of my grief. I wrote a book called Tears to Triumph a couple years ago, a few years ago, and I opened it with a quote from Rilke: "Let me not squander the hours of my pain." You know, coming out of my presidential campaign, I knew about a lot of this. And I called a friend of mine, a minister named Mary Morrissey, who does great work. You might know her work. She's out there. Very, very wise woman. And Mary started talking to me about St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul, and the principles of the dark night of the soul. And the principle of the dark night of the soul that she was speaking to me about was, it's not if, it's when. And that where you go in the midst of that pain, the consciousness that you have in the midst of the crucifixion is what will determine how quickly you get to the resurrection and what it means. And like I said, you know, when the women were told his body is not there anymore, he is risen, you're not going to be the same person. Look at you, you're a perfect example.
Yeah.
And also, you said that's what really initiated your spiritual journey.
Yeah.
You know, in the story of Buddha, the prince, he's named Siddhartha, he was raised in such a way that his father was trying to guarantee that he would never know suffering. But one night he climbed over the castle compound walls and he saw human suffering for the first time. That was when he began his journey to enlightenment. So we have to be the people right now. This is a tough time. It's a tough time in America. It's a tough time in the world. But guess what? Nobody's going to restore, regenerate, and repair all this except us. And this is this moment of evolutionary challenge to become the people that we can be. And you and I talked about this. This is not a time for women to be little girls, which is why your work is important, which is why the work of so many doing this kind of thing. Come on, no more ditzy, no more shallow. We're going to be great women. Great women. And this is not a time for men to be little boys. We've been infantilized by this culture. We've had a prolonged adolescence. These are very serious times, and the most loving people become the most serious people, the most mature people, that life matters. Letting a child go hungry. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Acting in a way that makes it less reasonable to assume we can bequeath a healthy planet to our children. No, 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 no. Something happens in us when we gain that conviction. And today, unfortunately, some of the most hate-filled people have the most conviction. We can't just be dedicated to love, sometimes kind of sort of when it's convenient. And so that's my hope for the book, is that Jesus becomes for those who feel called. If he's for you, you know it. And this book is not saying, nor does A Course in Miracles say, he is the only way. But unconditional love is the only way. And he is a portal and a path to unconditional love for those who feel called to it. And he can't take from us what we won't release to him. But if we're ready to do that work and to get real, then miracles start to happen in our lives. And then we become miracle workers and we can get about the business of saving this world in time.
Yeah. Oh, so inspired. And for anybody that's just joining us, we're talking about Marianne Williamson's book, The Mystic Jesus. So definitely go grab it. Amazing. And Marianne, just everything you're saying, I just feel so deeply inspired by. And I'd be curious to hear too, and I know running for president has been an entirely new experience for you, going from just in this world and all of the work that you've done in the self-development and spiritual spaces, moving into seeing so much more going through the presidential candidacy. So I'd be curious to hear like what your lessons have been, even as of recent, as you've stepped into that role, into this deep level of responsibility and an even greater scale.
You know, we only have, I think, 40 some odd days left before the election. And this is a very fragile time. I spent a year and a half saying what I believed. And at this point, for me to get too real and too honest, I think would sort of clutter the field and wouldn't be of service. I appreciate right now, people need to think very deeply about this election. And, you know, Gandhi was asked, who is the leader of the Indian independence movement? And his answer was the small, still voice within. So I'm very aware that this is such an important moment. I don't think it's a moment for me to overlay with my personal experience. You call me after this election, oh, I'll have some things to say.
Okay, we will connect because I want to know.
But I think it was an honor to be able to do it. And right now, I just want to talk about the good stuff. And then I'll talk about everything else afterward.
We'll connect when it's complete, because I'm sure there will be many lessons and learnings.
This is what I learned. The American people are not the problem. The American people are good and decent people. I'm not saying we're better than anyone else, because we're not, but we're not worse than anyone either. And speaking around the country to people on the left and the right, you know, these ridiculous silos that we put ourselves in. We've got to all come out of our silos. We've been trained to think, no, this is my view, so this is what we think, or this is what we think. We all need to just put the silo away, think for yourself. And that's what I found. People open, people having a deep conversation. You know, Gandhi said politics should be sacred. He wasn't talking about a religious doctrine, or he wasn't talking about separation of church and state. He was talking about where we come from. You know, the place in your heart. Like when I talked about your realization that everybody in this room has suffered, you see the room differently. And I found that when people did want to have a meaningful conversation about healthcare, about education, about their jobs, about the food, the air, people want to go deep. And so it was very inspiring. I also found that the political system has issues that I will talk about at another time. But right now, that part was very inspiring.
Beautiful. And thank you for reflecting that back to us. That's something that I've just found, even connecting with people in doing this work. It's really let me into the hearts of humanity and realize that all of us just want to be seen, heard, and know that we're not alone. And most people have really big hearts. And I think the more that we speak into that, to your point of what we were even talking about earlier, of like, are we speaking into what it is that we want to create? And I love that you're speaking into that and reflecting.
And that
back.
We can do that collectively.
Yeah.
We already all know about visualize the life you want, visualize the planet you want. The air has been completely cleansed, purified. The food is all healthy. No children are hungry. Nobody's hungry, which could be. We have enough food. We need to take so many of the tools that in the transformational and higher consciousness community, we've already learned for ourselves. How do I transform my life? We can transform the planet. Just imagine what you want. Visualize a world in which so much unnecessary suffering doesn't exist. And then once we get, and you get to that shared uh, commitment and devotion to that possibility, then within that, there are different ideas. You know, nobody has a monopoly on truth. There are high-minded conservative values, high-minded liberal values. You know, nobody has a monopoly on truth. We start to listen to one another. And we need to practice nonviolent communication in our politics as much as in our personal relationships. So I think there's a whole frontier of possibility that will come about when we are willing to take so much of this deeper meaning and apply it to our collective as well as to our individual experience.
Yeah. And the microcosm and the macrocosm, as above, so below, and it's all one and the same, and really beautiful. And again, the final question that I have for you is just as someone who is so impacted by your work, and I feel so deeply grateful and honored that we've gotten the chance to now connect multiple times and meet in person. And I have such a deep desire to carry this work forward in my own way. And for anybody that is of the younger generation wanting to carry this forward, anybody listening on this live right now who wants to do this work in their own way, what would you say is the best way for us as a younger generation to continue to create change and bring this forward in the world?
Well, first of all, I would say congratulations, because you already are.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, I look at you, Rachel, as I've looked at quite a few of the people who have interviewed me recently, and I see myself when I was younger. How old are you?
Yeah, I just turned 30.
I was 31 when my career began. I think the older you are, the more you know certain things. The younger you are, the more you know certain other things. The younger you are, the more you know what's happening now. The older you are, the more you know about certain things that never change. So at the age of 30, you own your wisdom at 30. You own your wisdom and you're doing it. And I think in a practical level, the one thing I will say, read the source material. You know, so I can tell from the way you've spoken, I can tell from your sharing your own experience, you're not coming from a shallow place. That sort of concerns me a little with some people, no matter what their age. But I see so many people like yourself who are reading the books, getting deep, understanding, being humble, learning from others, learning from those who have done it, learning from the great religious figures, the spiritual figures, and then do as the voice within you tells you to do. But own your wisdom and own your power. Don't apologize for it. And then the one last thing I will say about that, women have got to start speaking up for other women.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when the feminism that I was of my youth, like my 20s and the 70s, there was no feminism without sisterhood. It was understood that none of us were getting there unless all of us got there. When you see a sister being lambasted, burned at the stake, figuratively, for speaking the wisdom of the heart, and you're afraid to speak up because you figure if they come after her, they might come after me, and then I'll lose clicks.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I think you're wonderful, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marianne. It's been such an honor, and I'm so grateful to just be connected with you and to get to spread your mission and message even farther and wider. And everyone listening to this, please go get Marianne's book, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. It is amazing. Go listen to the podcast we did out on It's Fucking Spiritual. This was part 2. I will be posting this as well, so you guys can enjoy this to rewatch and everything. There was a lot of beautiful nuggets of wisdom. And Marianne, thank you again. It's just such an honor to be connected with you in any way that I can support anytime. I'm here. So I'm really grateful. Yeah.
God bless you, darling. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye. Amazing, y'all. Go get this book. So grateful for Marianne and her wisdom, and for all of you that were here and listened and shared in the chat, in their comments. Thank you. We feel your love so much. It's such an honor to to be a steward of this work and to be connected with Marianne. So you guys go get this book. Go listen to the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. There's some clips out on my page and on Marianne's page, and it's out. There's a video on Spotify, YouTube, all the things. It's on both of our channels. So go get this. Please stay connected. Definitely message me, DM me if you got something from this conversation. Marianne's such a legend, and so honored to be connected with her. So where can you get the podcast? Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. It's called It's Fucking Spiritual. It's in my bio, and you'll see it anywhere that you get podcasts. You guys, thank you so much. I will save this to my feed, and we'll post this on the podcast as well so that you can continue to enjoy it and continue to enjoy her teachings. Thank you for listening to the It's Fucking Spiritual podcast. I am so glad that you're here. And if this episode resonated with you, I invite you to share this with a friend that you feel needs to hear it. And if you are really feeling the love and support for this show, this podcast thrives off of your listens and your reviews. So I would love if you could leave us an honest review. We would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, and it helps us get this podcast in the hands of more people and would mean so much to me to receive your support. So thank you.